Hey class, I'm going to go over chapter 5 lecture in this video. Okay, so we're going to talk about market outcome and tax incidence. So first, we're going to talk about welfare economics. So welfare economics study how is the allocation of the resource in the economy affect economic well-being. So are the consumers better off or worse off, or the producers better off or worse off? So basically, when we allocate resources among different parties in the economy, how is everybody doing? Is everybody getting better off, or is everybody getting hurting from the resource allocation? That's called welfare economics. Now, there are two measurements for welfare economics. So from two different sides of the economy, we have the consumer surplus, which measures how are the consumers doing, and then we have the producer surplus, measures how the producers doing. Now, for consumer surplus, let's look at that one first. For consumer surplus, we'll look at think it this way. Consumer surplus is how much money you're saving when you're buying this good. That is your consumer surplus. So to find out how much money you're saving, we need to find out how much are you willing to pay for the good. Now, this term called willing to pay, think this as the highest price, the maximum price consumers are willing to pay for the good. That's called willing to pay. So suppose, let's say for a textbook, even though the price for the textbook might be, let's say $140 for a textbook, but you are willing to pay $200. So when you buy the textbook, you are better off because you're able to buy the book within your budget and then still save some money in the process. So willing to pay measures the maximum price consumers are willing to pay for the good. Now, depends on different consumers. Some consumers have a higher willingness to pay. Some consumers has a lower willingness to pay. So their consumer surplus will be different too. So for consumer surplus, this equals to your willingness to pay minus the price of the good. That's called consumer surplus. So let's suppose we have three consumers here. Each consumer has different preference for the textbook. So Beanie, we need to pay $200. Mitch, we need to pay $150, and then Frank, we need to pay $100. Now, when the price is only $140, let's see who will buy the book. So Beanie will buy the book. Mitch will buy the book. Now for Frank, it's too expensive because remember, Frank is only willing to pay $100, but the price is actually $140, so price is actually too high, out of budget. So he wouldn't buy the book. So only two consumers will buy this book. So for our consumer surplus, this again will be your willingness to pay minus the price of the good. Now for our first consumer, Beanie, his willing to pay is $200. His price for the book was going to be $140. So 200 minus 140. So he would save $60, and that 60 is his consumer surplus. And then Mitch would save $10. So 150 was his willingness to pay. Price 140. So he would save $10. Now for Frank, Frank wouldn't buy the good. Therefore, Frank has no consumer surplus. Now, so consumer surplus only happens once you buy the book. If you don't buy the book at all, you have no consumer surplus. Okay, so for the two consumers on top, Beanie and Mitch, they will buy the good and they will have a consumer surplus. But for Frank, he wouldn't buy the textbook, so he has no consumer surplus. We can also draw the demand curve with each consumer's willingness to pay on demand curve, and that's what demand curve is. So on the regular demand curve, when it's going down on a straight line, each point on the demand curve is a consumer's willingness to pay. But since now we have only three consumers, so it wouldn't be a straight line, it would be a little staircase. So every single step is a consumer's willingness to pay. So Beanie willing to pay $200, Mitch willing to pay $150, and then Frank willing to pay $100. So again, each step of the demand curve is a consumer's willingness to pay. And to find out how much our consumer surplus is, just draw the price line. So let's suppose price will be at $175. Your consumer surplus will be the area that's below your demand curve, above the price line. So this little rectangle here, that is our consumer surplus. So that will be 200 minus 175, and the consumer surplus is $25. And then if price goes down, let's go down to $125. Now you have two people buy the good. So Beanie will buy it, and then he will need to pay $200 for it. So for Beanie's consumer surplus will be $75. And then for Mitch, we need to pay $150. So his consumer surplus will be $25. So 75 plus 25. Then the total consumer surplus in this market will be at $100. So that's a total saving for all the consumers involved. Now you wouldn't get anything out of Frank, because for Frank, his willingness to pay is too low. He wouldn't buy the good, therefore has no consumer surplus. He has no saving from the transaction because he had no transaction. Okay, all right. So next is our producer surplus. Now the goal for every single producer is to maximize the profit. Now to find profit, you're gonna take your price of the good minus the cost of production. We can also call this cost of production. We can call this the willingness to sell, which is the minimum price. The minimum price the sellers are willing to sell this good. That's called willingness to sell. Okay, so let's suppose we have again 3 people here, and then each person is offering a tutoring service. So for Beanie, he want to charge $30 per hour. Mitch want to charge $20 per hour, and then Frank want to charge $10 per hour. Now let's suppose the market price is $25. Which of the 3 people will provide the service? Now for Beanie wouldn't do it, because for Beanie, he only sell for $30. That's how much his service will cost, right? But consumers only pays $25, so too cheap. He wouldn't sell the service, because if he does, he'll lose money. Now for Mitch, he wants to sell for $20. Consumer pays $25. He's pretty happy because consumers are now paying more than his cost, so he will sell the service. And then Frank wants to sell for $10. That's his cost. Price for the service is $25, so he'll make a profit. So Frank will also sell. So whenever the price is more than the willingness to sell, producer will sell this good. So that's where the producer surplus will come from. So for producer surplus, it's your willingness to sell, WTS, minus the price of the good. That's your producer surplus. So for Beanie, he will have no producer surplus because he didn't sell. For Mitch, his producer surplus will be $25. That's the price. Oh, sorry guys, this is reversed. It's the price minus willingness to sell. Okay, so Mitch price $25, willingness to sell is $20, so he'll get a $5 profit, and that profit is called producer surplus. And then for Frank, price is $25, his willingness to sell is $10, so get a $15 profit, and that is also producer surplus. Now you can also draw this on the supply curve. So on the regular supply curve, every point on the supply curve is a producer's WTS, willingness to sell. But if you only have 3 producers, then I'm going to have a little staircase again. And then each step will be a producer's willingness to sell. Okay, so for Beanie, his willingness to sell will be 30. For Mitch, his willingness to sell will be 20. And then for Frank, his willingness to sell will be 10. To find a producer surplus, draw the price line, and then that will be below the price line above the supply curve. That's our producer surplus. So for the first one will be just Frank. So when the price is 15, only Frank will sell, and then Frank's producer surplus will be $5. So price minus the willingness to sell. Okay, but when the price goes up to a higher level, then this area is our Frank's producer surplus. So $15 for Frank, and then for Mitch will be this area here. There's a $5. So your total producer surplus will be 5 plus 15, and that's a $20 producer surplus. All right, so to find market efficiency, we have a new measurement. It's called total surplus. So the goal for every single consumer is to maximize our consumer surplus. The goal for every single producer is to maximize our producer surplus. And then the goal for every single economy is to maximize our total surplus. Okay, so let me say it one more time. The goal for every single consumer is to maximize our consumer surplus. the goal for every single producer is to maximize our producer surplus, and then the goal for every single economy is to maximize our total surplus. So as long as the total surplus is maximized, that means you have achieved your market efficiency. Okay, so to find your consumer and producer surplus on a regular graph, what you do, find out where the price is. So the price is coming from intersection here. So this is the price. Consumer surplus is below your demand curve, above your price line. So this little blue triangle here, that is our consumer surplus. Now producer surplus will be reversed, will be below the price line, above the supply curve. So this area here is our producer surplus. Now to find the consumer producer surplus, look at the triangle. You need to find out what is the area of a triangle. Okay, so for the blue triangle, the area, take the vertical difference times the horizontal difference divided by 2. So base times height divided by 2. That's your area for triangle. Okay, and then for the producer surplus, same thing. So find out what the vertical difference is. Now don't just take the 4, because the 4 is not the base. The base is from the bottom point to the 4 over here. So that's your vertical difference. Okay, so find the vertical difference and times the horizontal difference and divided by 2. That's your producer surplus. All right. Now, whenever the consumer and producer surplus changes, that's because of price change. So if price change, it will cause a consumer and producer surplus to change. So if your price change from point A to point B, that will change your consumer and producer surplus, and that will also have something called a deadweight loss. And I will show you what that is. Okay. So let's look at our taxations, welfare, and deadweight loss. So first, know what's a tax incidence. So tax incidence, it just basically is the burden of tax that party have to pay. So these parties will be between your buyers of the good and sellers of the good. So the tax incidence is how much the tax burden will be on the buyers and sellers. That's called tax incidence. Now, I know that, so let's suppose, let me ask you a question, guys. So let's suppose government impose a tax on the buyer. Let's say the buyer for textbooks. So government says for every textbook student buys, student must pay a $25 tax for it. Now, what will be the tax incidence of that? So you might want to tell me, the student will pay for $25 and then seller pays nothing. Now that's the common belief, but that's not necessarily true, because for the tax burden, it's always shared between buyers and sellers. So even though you put a $25 tax on the buyers, but it doesn't mean the buyer will pay the entire tax. That more than often, this tax can be shared and will be shared between buyers and sellers. Any idea why would a seller want to pay part of the buyer tax? And imagine if we put the entire tax on the buyers. So buyer pays, so before the textbook was $140, and now plus a $25 tax, it become $165, right? That's too high. So at a very high price, students wouldn't buy books anymore. If students don't buy books anymore, how much will be the profit for the sellers? Nothing, right? So if you put a tax on the buyers and then buyers reduce consumption, the sellers will also be worse off, because the sellers wouldn't get any profit from any lost transactions. So the sellers actually have an incentive to pay the buyer tax to make it artificially cheaper, so buyer will still buy something and then they will still get some profit out of it. All right, so let me show you how this works. If you put a tax on the buyer and sellers, so tax on buyer, that will shift your supply curve, and tax on buyer will shift your demand curve to the right. So you're going to have a new demand curve. So D1 is your original demand curve. D2 is your demand with tax. Once you have a demand with tax, you're going to have a new equilibrium right here. So at this new equilibrium, go down, get your quantity. So before tax, our quantity was 1,000, and now with the tax, quantity becomes 750. And it makes sense, right? Because if you put a tax on something, so for this one, this will be $1 tax on milk. So you put a tax on milk, that will make milk more expensive. So according to law of demand, price goes higher, we'll buy less. So with the tax become too expensive, we want to purchase less amount of milk. So milk transactions goes down from 1,000 to 750. Now for the prices, they're gonna have a new price called a buyer price. That's how much buyer pays, and then seller price. That's how much seller receive. So your tax equals to the difference between the buyer price and seller price. So take whatever buyer pays, subtract whatever seller receive, that difference is our tax. So over here, our buyer price will be on the demand curve here, on the old demand curve. That's our buyer price. So buyer price is 450. And then seller price will be on the old supply curve. That's 350. So this vertical difference here, that is our tax, which is $1, right? So 450 minus 350, and tax is going to be $1 tax. Now, this $1 tax, again, is shared between buyers and sellers. And to find out how much is the buyer and seller tax incidence, so the tax on buyer, this equals to your buyer price. So the new buyer price, subtract the price at equilibrium. So how much the buyer paying now with the tax minus how much the buyer was paying before with no tax, and that difference is the incidence of tax on buyers. So the buyer price according to the graph was at 450. The equilibrium price, I believe, is $4. Yes, $4. So equilibrium is $4. So 450 minus $4, then the tax on buyer will be 50 cents. And then the tax on seller, that will be the equilibrium price minus the seller price. So that's how much seller was receiving before. So before tax, they're getting $4 for every transaction. But now the seller price is only $3.50. They're getting $3.50 for every transaction. So they're giving up 50 cents. So buyer paid a 50 cents tax, and then seller paid a 50 cents tax. That's called a tax incidence. Okay, so how much tax did each person pay? All right. Now, if you do the tax on the seller, what that would do, that will push your supply curve to the left, and then again you have a new lower transaction 750. Buyer price on demand curve is 450. Seller price on supply curve is 350. So if you do the math right, on this difference here, the buyer tax incidence will be 50 cents. The seller tax incidence is also 50 cents. So it's like nothing changed, right? So which means it doesn't matter which party you put a tax on. This tax is always shared between buyers and seller. So you put a tax on the buyer, some of the burdens will be shared by the sellers. But if you put a tax on the seller, on the business, then some of the burden will be passed on to the buyers. So it doesn't matter which party you put a tax on, your tax incidence will be the same. That how much buyer pays and how much seller receive wouldn't be any difference. It depends on which party you put a tax on. Okay. Now, however, tax is not always efficient. Tax is inherently inefficient, because with tax you're going to reduce the number of transactions. So there will be some transaction that could happen before, but now with the tax, the buyer pays too much, the seller receives not enough, so some transaction will be lost, and that loss is called a dead weight loss. Okay, so it's loss of total surplus due to any market distortion. That's called a dead weight loss. So with tax that we lost, with tariffs that we lost, later on I'm going to show you that with a monopoly, there will also be some dead weight loss. Now to find a dead weight loss, your dead weight loss will be the little triangle here. That's your dead weight loss. Okay. Let me show you a better example than what's on the PowerPoint, because the PowerPoint is not the perfect examples. All right. So let's suppose we have a market. This is the equilibrium price, and now we have buyer price, that's called PB, seller price PS. This is quantity with tax, and this is quantity at equilibrium, so no tax. Okay, so supply demand. Now before with no tax, let's label this area A, area B, C, D, E, F. Okay, so with no tax, your consumer surplus, so no tax, the price will be at equilibrium. So no tax, your consumer surplus area A, B, and C. And then producer surplus will be area D, E, and F. And then total surplus will be all together, so A, B, C, D, E, F. Now with tax, this is the new buyer price. So consumer surplus is below your demand curve, above your price line. So with tax, your consumer surplus is only area A. And then for producer surplus, this will be below the price line, so below the buyer price, above, don't want to move that. So below the price line, above the supply curve, that's your producer surplus. Your government also gets something in return, so government collects the tax revenue. So this B and D is our government tax revenue. So tax revenue is B and D, and then your total surplus will be the consumer surplus, area A, plus producer surplus, area F, and then plus your government tax revenue B and D, because government is also part of the economy. So whatever revenue they have is also part of total surplus. So that's your new total surplus. But notice that before we had this E and F, right? But now we don't have them anymore. So E and F, they are lost. We don't have them anymore. So this E and F, we call them, so E and F is called deadweight loss. So that's the loss of efficiency in the economy. Something we had it before, but now with the tax, we don't have them anymore. So tax is inefficient because it caused deadweight loss. Okay. So talk about this. One thing about deadweight loss, what you learned from last chapter, elasticity, is connected with deadweight loss. So and also connected with the tax incidence. So we don't have to go through all those slides in the PowerPoint, but let me just give you a summary. Between two parties, between your demand and supply, whoever is more elastic, remember elastic means they're more flexible. So whoever is more elastic will pay a lower tax. Whoever is more inelastic will pay a higher tax. Well, because if you are inelastic, that means you are not flexible. So even with a higher tax and higher prices, you will still buy the good. So you're gonna end up paying the tax for it. So the more flexible you are, the lower tax you pay. The less flexible you are, the higher tax you pay. Okay, so make sure to write this down on your notes. This will come handy. Okay, and also this flexibility is related to our deadweight loss too. So between buyer and seller, if the market is very elastic, so for elastic market, it will cause more deadweight loss. So if both buyer and seller is very elastic, you put a tax on the market, then you destroy all the transactions. That's a huge deadweight loss. But if either party is very inelastic, so they're not very flexible, then you're gonna have a lower deadweight loss. So they still buy the good, right? As long as they buy the good, you have no deadweight loss. So this deadweight loss is all result coming from the loss of quantity transactions. So if you don't lose any transaction because one party is very inelastic, they either still have to buy the good or still have to sell the good. They're inelastic, then you have no deadweight loss. Okay, so in perfect elastic demand curve, perfectly inelastic demand, or perfectly inelastic supply, you have no deadweight loss. Okay, but it's very elastic, you have a huge deadweight loss. All right, so we talk about that. Also, you need to know about the relationship between your tax revenue and debt loss. So for government, they always want to achieve this equilibrium, right? So how much tax do you want to collect? But there's also a trade-off. The more tax you collect, the more debt loss you have. So when the tax is very low, so let's suppose for this graph over here, at equilibrium, so with no tax, you have zero debt loss. But if you have a tax, so a little bit tax, you're creating a little debt loss here. So debt loss is increasing as with a small tax. But if you have a big tax or a moderate tax, see how much is our debt loss now? A huge debt loss, right? But if you have a very high tax, your debt loss goes higher. And then if your tax is ridiculous, extreme tax, the entire market all become debt loss. So your debt loss will increase as the tax goes higher and higher. So at a high tax, very high debt loss. At a low tax or no tax, you have very low debt loss or no debt loss. Okay, so debt loss is a result of tax. All right, so guys, that's it for this chapter. Have any question, let me know, and I will see you for chapter 6. Okay, all right, bye-bye.